It obviously comes down to knowing who your target audience is, right? Making sure that you're really clear on kind of, what are the target companies, what are the profiles, how do you sort through the list of potential suspects to begin to prioritize sort of where your top targets are. And then I think within those organizations, right, you got to figure out who are the target personas. Understand who the players are within those organizations, what's the value proposition, how are you different, and how do you, what's the motion to getting to reaching those people. We refer to it as demand generation, right? And it's the things that you're doing on the front end before sales even gets involved. So it's the marketing, it's the events, it's a lot of what you're doing.
Welcome to M&A Science, where leading M&A practitioners share lessons learned from their experience. If you're interested in keeping up with the latest from M&A Science, visit mascience.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. We share highlights from our interviews and invitations to events as we build the greatest community of forward-thinking M&A practitioners. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. Joining me today is Dick Dunkel, Global Head of Field Enablement at Celonis. Celonis is a data processing company founded in Munich, Germany that sells software as a service to improve business processes. Today, we're going to talk about how to build out your go-to-market organically for acquisitions. Dick, I know your background goes way more than that, and you're also really humble about it, but can we kick things off with more about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you. And by the way, that was an excellent description of Celonis. It's fun to work at a company where you have such a clear value proposition of helping companies to improve business processes to drive positive business outcomes. And so I've enjoyed my time there. I've been there for 3 years. A little bit of background on me. Maybe I'll start with my college career. I started out as a civil engineer. I actually worked as a design engineer for a couple of years, and then I made my way into sales. My first sales job post-graduation was with Xerox Corporation, and they had excellent training. And then I made my way into Xerox engineering systems so that I could tell my parents that I was using my college degree. And it was during my time at Xerox that I was introduced to actually my first sales book, and I have it on my bookshelf behind me here, Spin Selling. Excellent sales fundamental, the basic concept of understanding a situation, identifying the problem, exploring the implications of that problem, and then the needs payoff is the value of the solution. And so that really introduced me to a methodology and a framework for understanding customers' needs and building value. From there, I made my way into software, and I worked for a company called Parametric Technology Corporation. So one of the great sales cultures and technology companies. Company grew in the time that I was there, from 300 million to $1 billion in sales over the course of those 5 years in the 90s. And I worked for a great sales leader, a guy by the name of John McMahon, who went on to become a 5-time CRO. He was the head of sales at a company called Blade Logic and then BMC, and now he's on the board of directors at a company called Snowflake. Following PTC, I worked for a number of very innovative technology companies, a short stint at SAP. I live in the Philadelphia area, so if you work in technology, you don't have a lot of choices for technology companies in Philadelphia. So SAP's global or American headquarters are in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, and I had a 2-year stint there. But for the most part, working with very innovative technology companies. I worked in data center, hosting, and application management services. I worked for a company called Digby, which did location-based marketing and analytics, Sprinkler, social media management technology company, and now Celonis. And we're helping to really revolutionize the way that companies identify business process pains and implement corrective measures. So that's a little bit about my background.
You've been all over the place. I like how you start with engineering, and I think within your roles, it sounded like you did have an emphasis on engineering the sales process or the go-to-market.
It's a very fair and good observation. I think engineering gave me or reinforced sort of the critical thinking and the problem solving. And I think obviously so many jobs are that. But the development of, or the use of spin selling, for example, and then the evolution or the creation of MEDDIC, which is a very well-known sales qualification methodology that I coined, the acronym in 1996, was really just out of a necessity of wanting to bring structure and process and methodology. And so I think that MEDDIC is something that has really proliferated very much on its own, because it's motherhood and apple pie. I actually think it's kind of similar to one of my other favorite books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I would never compare myself to Stephen Covey. He's a legend, but I think the basic idea is that these principles are timeless, right? The reason why people buy, the reason why people, build lasting relationships in business, those are timeless principles. And so I think that that's one of the things that I was able to package. I didn't invent the concept of a champion, right? But I think that it obviously is part of the equation.
It's funny, you seeded this stuff with MEDDIC back in 96, and now you fast forward today, and it's the hot thing when it comes to SaaS software sales. A lot of companies look for it. I know our company does. We look for anybody that's got experience working with MEDDIC. So it's interesting. I don't know if you've expected that when you first started working on it. And
I'll tell you a funny story. I'll tell you a funny story. So I've bumped into people and they've said, how many MEDDIC implementations have you done? And the answer is I've done one, and it was at PTC. So when I got to, Exodus Communications, when I got to Choreo, when I got to Sprinkler, they had already adopted it. It had already been implemented. And I came in those cases, I came in sales, sales management positions. And so I was basically, helping to execute on a process that had already been, a framework that had already been implemented. Now, partly that was because of my own personal network, right? And the CROs for those organizations were people that I had relationships with. But, I think about, for example, what we're doing right now with MEDDIC at Celonis. We're really operationalizing it, right? We're using it as a framework to ensure that we're executing in a quality manner at every sales stage. We're also using it as a way to define how salespeople, the competencies model for salespeople. So you now have a competency model that's helping to identify where salespeople can get stronger. And that's now providing a feedback loop into our training and development program, right? So I sort of think of it as a Swiss Army knife. You can use it. It has a lot of different applications. And when you really implement it in a sort of a holistic and robust way, you can create a framework that provides continuous improvement.
It's going to be fun stuff for us to talk about. Now, I asked you to come on the podcast, and even though we have a very M&A focused audience, I had twofolds. I reached out to you because I wanted to take advantage and get some advice on our own go-to-market as an emerging startup company, but then also look forward into how that comes in play down the road when we may start looking at acquiring different products and solutions and how that would fit in.
Right.
So maybe I can give you a little bit of the background on the business, and then we could just pick things up from there. And I think some of the stuff is going to be pretty familiar with the experiences you've had. But the M&A Science Story actually started pretty typical founder story, where I spent about 10 years working as an M&A advisor, wanted to do something in tech, joined a startup, bombed out, but was very intrigued by the exposure I had with software engineers and how they use project management tools to manage developing software, and thought, why come we don't have tools like this for M&A? Like everything's done in Excel. So that was the original inspiration for starting a company called Deal Room back in 2012. And every founder mistake, I went through that whole hard learning. But the product and the market evolved, where we started with a focus for investment banking, shifted to corporate, very focused on solving diligence, and then integration, then pipeline, and the product itself became a lifecycle management solution. It was around 2017, a friend of mine in marketing, Andy, encouraged me to get into podcasting, which really evolved into a lot of the marketing content that we put out there. I think the podcast too, it had an underpinning mission of the industry is challenged with the silos. That all these practitioners operate with very little standardizations or clarity on best practices. So the idea was to leverage a podcast as a medium to enable practitioners to share lessons learned, identify what are the proven techniques, and that ended up turning into a whole digital media business that we run today. So that was 2017. 2018, we spun off a product from Deal Room called Firm Room. And the idea was to create a self-service virtual data room because we're turning away these small little firms that didn't want to pay the price for Deal Room, and thought, wait, we already have the technology. Why don't we put it on its own instance and make it into a self-service model, which has been a great investment. It does really well. Then it was 2020. We started Agile M&A, which was a book we published as a framework built around case studies from Google and Atlassian, how they use these agile techniques. That was great just to create more of that open source initiative. And think of it as other industries where we've seen it in the software space, like Atlassian would advocate for moving from a waterfall to agile approach. Also, you look at HubSpot going for advocacy for inbound, like here's a general best practice to champion for the industry. And that's what the idea with commonalities, right? Here, the same challenges you have with M&A, you find in the software space. You don't have a lot of information in the beginning, and you got to validate it as you collect more information. Right. And how do you take things in an iterative approach? 2021, we launched our online academy. So then we run an online school where industry practitioners are creating their curriculum, presenting courses that are geared towards educating other practitioners. So it's learning from the folks that are actually doing this now, instead of the professor you might get that hasn't done a deal in 10 years. Very important. Then 2022, now we're looking at adding consulting services to help corporations build their in-house capability to do M&A deals, and also talent, helping them source talent to build their M&A function. So we're starting to get into this realm where things are getting diversified, that we started with a single product. Now, how do we go to market with a portfolio play? I think before even getting into that, Dick, the 90% of our sales right now are all inbound. Because we have all this content out there, we get a lot of inbound interest. How do you start with building an outbound pipeline?
Right. Yeah, very interesting. I'll tell you what I've seen in terms of, the outbound is it obviously comes down to knowing who your sort of your target audience is, right? Making sure that you're really clear on kind of, what are the target companies, what are the profiles, how do you sort through the list of potential suspects to begin to prioritize sort of where your top targets are. And then I think within those organizations, right, you got to figure out who are the target personas, understand who the players are within those organizations, what's the value proposition, how are you different, and how do you, what's the motion to getting to reaching those people. We refer to it as demand generation, right? And it's the things that you're doing on the front end before sales even gets involved. So it's the marketing, it's the events, it's a lot of what you're doing. So we're a larger company now. We're 2,500 employees. So we do things like events and webinars. Where we're educating potential prospects, and then following that up with a business development function, right? So we have a whole team of BDRs who are responsible for sort of following up and taking those people that maybe have some brand awareness now and begin to develop them to the point where, they'll sort of raise their hand and say, okay, I'll have a conversation with you. And so that's a journey in and of itself, right? Is that whole business development process of creating awareness, making contact, trying to deliver the right piece of content. A lot of what we're doing right now is we're starting to shift really towards a very vertical focus, industry focus. So we've created targeted industries in financial services and CPG and retail and oil and gas and high tech, so that we can basically have a team of folks. We can develop some more targeted content. We can reach out and deliver our story to those targeted audiences. So that's a journey in and of itself. And then our business development folks make contact, and with the purpose of really trying to initiate a conversation. And then that's where we hand off to sales. And at that point, then they're getting introduced to an account executive or a seasoned industry person that can dive a little bit deeper to see if there's really a value proposition, or that we can we strategically align what we're doing to the priorities of the business.
That's a lot of stuff you got to put together to make that happen.
It is. It's a lot of moving parts, and it takes a lot of expertise. But I think, I think at the end of the day, right, it's, you've got a universe of suspects, and then you have to sort of try to figure out who are your most likely targets within that universe. And that's where it all starts.
Yeah, it sounds like for step one, find out who your ideal customers are, which you run inbound. For us, it's always either director of corporate development or VP of corporate development. And it sounds like from there, now you're running that demand gen approach towards them, where it's engagement of, you join this event, join this roundtable, something that like that, something
exactly
content that may be very specific to some of those challenges that they would encounter.
That's right. And we're also, like you, I think we're trying to foster a community. We just completed a world tour event. So we did something like 12 cities. And these were actually live events. So it was fun and exciting to be back in person again. And we did a live event in, New York. We did one in Texas. We did, several in Europe, San Francisco, Chicago. And so to bring like-minded people into those locations, like, for example, the one that we did in Houston had very much of an oil and gas theme. And so that was a great way for us to sort of foster that kind of the value proposition that we're bringing to that community.
And then from there, you have a business development team that would then engage with those participants to then identify, hey, are there some specific needs, or identify where your solution could fit in, and then pass it to the sales team?
Exactly.
That sounds easier said than done.
Easier said than done. I think people, it's how the sausage gets made, right? But it's hard work, and we've got tools that are helping our BDRs to manage campaigns. It's sometimes you're touching somebody 6, 8, 10 times before you get a response. But when you get a response, and a lot of times it's just about timing. You get somebody that finally raises their hand and says, okay, we have an initiative that we think this aligns with, we'd be interested in talking to you. So I think, like a lot of things, timing is a big part of it.
Is there like an order you start with, where you start with something first to get things going and then tack on these other components?
Definitely. There is a campaign strategy that we follow, and sometimes depending on how people react to the content, that may sort of divert the subsequent content or the way that we approach them. So we do try to tailor the content, and we do try to deliver sort of an experience as people are. It's not, rather than just sort of delivering content. We've all been on the receiving end of those campaigns. That if you make it a little bit more thoughtful and with an eye towards, certainly in our business, right, what we do is there's a significant educational component to what we do, right? Because we're offering something that people don't even know, in most cases don't even know exists. And so there is an educational component that we have to sort of navigate through, and so that helps to guide our journey.
So you're focused on customer experience right out of the gate, that, hey, what does this look like? How we're going to engage with them and educate them, instead of, because I would think you would just start hiring sales reps to go knock on doors and, do that typical thing that you would assume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is some of that too. We have, we have kind of the mass, I'll say sort of the mass marketing strategy. But then we also have very strategic account selling, right? So we've got strategic account executives that are coming from these industries, right? These are guys that have 15, 20 years of sales experience in oil and gas or financial services. And they know the businesses, they know the clients, They know sometimes are familiar with their needs and pain points and technology landscapes where they can reach out to those leaders and say, I've got, hey, it's me. I'm over here at Celonis now, and we've got something that we think really could strategically support one of your strategic priorities. And for us, I think because there's so much noise out there, right? And you're always competing for mind share, that we have to deliver the right message, to the right person. And it really takes, we really try to take a rifle shot approach, do the research, right? Understand the mode of the business, understand their strategic priorities. If you do the research, you can learn quite a bit about these companies, right? You can understand their corporate objectives, their business strategies, their targeted initiatives. And if you can kind of align your messaging to those things, you're much more likely to get a response.
I find that very true. You can listen to a recent earnings call, annual report, find a lot of this, especially for public companies. When you get that information, is that how you're building out the webinar, the content, or is that somehow enabling a team to go reach out directly with this narrative that I see you doing
Both.
X and
both? I mean, both, all of the above, right? I mean, you think about global pandemic and war in Europe and supply chain challenges, right, and disruptions. I mean, those are top of mind topics for every executive making strategic investments. And so we're doing webinars on how to improve your working capital, how to manage supply chain challenges to prioritize delivery or high priority clients, right? We have a good sense of what because the challenges that are faced by a manufacturer, one manufacturer, they're all experiencing, many of them are experiencing many of the same challenges. I think, as you said, taking a look at the earnings announcement, digging a little deeper, and we recently made an investment in a very, very interesting strategic research technology, research tool that is providing us with some insights, and it actually maps the intelligence that you're getting back to our use cases and our keywords, so that it even makes recommendations on which solution that we should be sort of promoting and which executives we should be targeting. But no, we're doing all of the above.
That sounds like really interesting technology.
Yeah, it is.
Are you liberal to say what it is?
It's a company called Databook. So
Okay.
check them out. We're new users. We've implemented it recently, and we are very bullish on what we think we can do with Databook. And Databook also works with what we think it's very complementary to, for example, a tool that we're using to do preliminary business cases. So we'll develop a preliminary business case as a way to say, we believe, we've implemented this use case in other companies in your industry. We believe we can deliver something like this for your organization. And so, you can understand some of the outside in metrics. You can develop a preliminary business case that you can then take as your hypothesis. And then we go through a series of technical validations to ultimately show that we can do what we say we can, that we can improve on-time payments by this amount, which is going to improve working capital. We can improve, one of the key metrics that a lot of companies follow is OTIF, right? On time and in full delivery, right? And so there's ways for us to actually help identify how to improve that for companies. And that's a quantifiable metric that we can actually measure. And so I think, previous to Celonis, I worked for a company that was in the social media space. And in social media, you're measuring sentiment, not sediment, sentiment. And that's very difficult to associate with hard dollars, right? It's super important and super valuable. But what's really fun and exciting about Celonis is that a lot of the needles that we're moving are directly tied to hard dollar returns. So we've been able to present some very, very compelling business cases.
Yeah, that's why I like getting ideas from the software space. Software marketing, they tend to be ahead of, especially our industry in M&A. I want to talk to you about leadership. I think when we look at changes as a company grows or as you do acquisitions and inevitably make a lot of changes, how do you I guess, bring in the right leader to drive change or identify them?
Yeah. So I think that it, there is an important aspect to company culture, and I think culture is an important part of it, right? Uh, but I think also sales culture, oftentimes in my experience, sales culture is kind of not necessarily company culture. It kind of is a reflection of company culture, but there are other aspects to it, and it has to do with the leadership that you bring in. Like what's the personality of the leadership? What's the sales motion? What's the experience level? What's the complexity? Like, how complex is this motion? How many people are contributing to that process? Is there a real sense of sort of teamwork and collaboration, or are you in a sales environment where you've got sort of people who are very much individual contributors? And that can also contribute to it. But I think so. You want to understand what do you stand for? You want to find leaders that obviously represent that. I think industry experience is super important. I've seen situations where you've had sales leaders come in to a small, high growth company, and they come from the company, a big company where they had the business card and the company logo, and they're now going into an environment where nobody knows who you are, and that can be culture shock for the leader, right? Because he or she is used to walking into an organization and saying, "Hey, I'm from this world-class bellwether technology company. You know who we are, right?" And everybody's like, "Well, of course we do, right?" And so you want to find somebody that I think is ready for the environment that they're going to be leading. And certainly when you're in the earlier stage company, you want somebody that certainly has a vision for where you want to go as an organization. But I think on a day-to-day basis, they have to be able to operate in and function in an environment where the sellers are having to survive and be successful. And when when you're working for a company that where your brand is just not known yet, right? That creates a very different dynamic. So certainly an important consideration.
Yeah. What are the key things that you look for when finding that person?
Well,
Because I get the culture thing, and you get that where it's like, hey, they seem to be that person that talks a lot and works around the
yeah.
clock like I do. But
One of the things I've seen is that there are leaders that sort of can do the very early stage thing, and they're really good at taking a company from Series A to Series B or C. And then there's another person that's like the person that can get you from Series C or D through IPO. And then maybe even another type of leader that gets you to sort of real scale. And so I think that the experiences that they've had demonstrating that they can operate within that range. I worked for a great sales leader in the early days at one company, and he was there for 3 or 4 years, and he did. And the beauty of this was that he knew exactly what he was there to do. He was there to get the company from here to here, zero to 200 million. And he was very, very good at that and successful at that. And when they got there, it was like, okay, well, it's time for me to go do, my next 0 to 200 million. And I think the subsequent leader that came in. So I think part of it is sort of them knowing what their strength is, knowing what their sweet spot is. I think that certainly is part of it. For us in what we do, it's very, very important that people are familiar with our space. You can sort of go with the best athlete. Some people take the best athlete strategy. I'm not a huge believer in that. I think there's enough talent out there that you can find a great athlete that's in your industry. So you should be able to get the combination of both. But I think other leadership qualities. I think to me, the sales leader has got to be trusted and has to be really seen as a real partner to the rest of the executive leadership team, right? I mean, they've really got to be able to operate as a unit. And so I don't know that there's any one size fits all. I think that the chemistry there is super important. And then I think some of the other characteristics I mentioned.
It sounds like track record is pretty important. It doesn't sound like you're the one to just take a bet on someone that may have not done it before.
I agree. I think definitely track record is a big part of it, because I think that people eventually, these are people who are oftentimes kind of late. Well, I don't want to say late in their career, but they're not early in their career, right? I mean, they've been there, they've done it, and so I think oftentimes that when you get to that point in your career, you sort of know where your strengths and weaknesses are. You know where your sweet spot is, and I think hopefully people are self-aware enough to be able to know and put themselves in a situation where they can make the most of their own personal strengths.
When thinking about building out the sales function, the broader go-to-market, what are the key roles that you need to develop? I guess, how do you look at that between key roles within sales versus the full go-to-market? Sure.
So, I mean, within sales specifically, I think we have to look at how complex is the sales motion? Again, back to some of what we talked about earlier. Are we looking for, is there a pre-sales function? Is there a technical function? Is there a security function? Is there a, there are a variety of sort of specialized skills that oftentimes need to be involved. So, for us, for example, what we do, we have sales people who are targeting specific industries, but we also have solution engineers that are supporting them and provide sort of technical expertise on the product. But we also have customer value managers who begin to get involved during the sales cycle, because in anticipation of them becoming a customer, because our goal is to sort of create a value-based proposal that we can then use as the model for the implementation plan, that we can use as then the model that we use for ongoing communication with the customer. So for me, and I'll just maybe offer a little sort of a personal note here, is that as a seller, the thing that was always most rewarding for me was when I saw the customers actually realizing the value, right? Seeing them implement the solution, seeing them achieve the business results. And so that can happen 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, a year after they actually implement the solution, right? So, you've got the celebration of the signature, but then you've got the value, you've got the implementation and the adoption and the value realization. And that's the moment in time when we can shake hands and we can say, hey, do you remember why we did business? Do you remember why we decided to enter into this relationship, and to be able to say that we've fulfilled some of those goals and objectives, and that there's a desire for the relationship to continue, and potentially expand. So you have to have an idea of sort of what that journey is to make sure that you understand sort of who the players are. But I'll also say that in the early days, that it's pretty common for organizations to bring in, again, purely from a sales perspective, to bring in, they're sometimes called rainmakers. They're the people who don't need a lot of structure, right? But they come from the industry. They're well connected. They know the business. They're people who are used to coming into sort of high change environments. And so in the early days, when you're just starting out, you can bring in, rainmakers, early stage people who can kind of produce on their own because they're really well connected. They're going to learn your product. But that's not a scalable model. That's a good model for getting started. But I think that once you're really ready to really build out a sales organization, that's when you really need to think about structure and having more clearly defined roles and responsibilities and building a sales playbook. That's kind of where I come in, is that's really where I've spent a good amount of time and have a good amount of expertise is in once you're ready to really scale the sales organization, right? What's your sales playbook? And how do we operationalize this so that we can really execute? We don't have to bring in rainmakers. We can bring in really talented people, but we want everybody to operate consistently. And because when we operate consistently, we can scale consistently, we can forecast, we can predictably grow the business.
When do you start thinking about doing that? Like, when's the right time?
Well, I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, typically there's a funding component to it, right? It's like, okay, we've sort of proven this thing out. We know we've got a real product. We've got some customers. We think that it's time. And so, that when you're ready to sort of take those funds and really scale the business, oftentimes that's where at least a percentage of the funds can go is into really building out and investing in building out the sales organization. Okay. But I think it typically happens after, typically after you've really validated the solution, right? You've got a viable product. There's clearly market demand for the product. You've had some successful implementations. You've got some referenceable customers. So it's like you feel like you've got some of the basic pieces in place. And then it's like, okay, are we ready to scale?
So it sounds like you do it pretty early. You would do that before getting rainmakers, or as an alternative to getting the rainmakers in.
Yeah, potentially.
It depends. Some more variables there.
Yes.
When we think about building the go-to-market, I think going back to the broader view on key roles, is that different when we think about taking that more of a process-oriented approach? Is it, hey, are we really emphasizing some of the marketing, demand gen initially, and then doing this? Like, how do you think that through in the order of those key roles?
Yeah. I think they happen together. I think that the marketing, as the marketing matures and becomes more targeted and more intelligent and the messaging improves, you begin to scale that. A lot of organizations have the business development function as that sort of that thing that sits in between sales and marketing. But not every organization. There's even been some discussion about whether or not, in some business models where, that's sort of interrupting the customer journey. And that if you just had salespeople, sort of reach all the way back into that pipeline generation mode, that there would be more of a more continuity of the experience. So I think that's up for debate. But in my own personal experience, I think that business development function has served a valuable, very scalable, very efficient step in the process. And then from from the sales perspective, I think one of the mistakes that people make is that as they begin to scale, they sometimes try to cover too much, or they try to address too many markets or too many industries. And I think, maintaining a high level of focus early is really important. It's easy to get diluted, and that can hurt your marketing efforts, right? Because now you're trying to sort of be all things to all people. And I think, we didn't flip the switch to really moving towards an industry focus in the U.S. until we got to about 100 sales reps. So up until that point, we were still very kind of account list based, and we were really focusing more on horizontal use cases, right? So thinking about use cases that were, the use cases that every business has: order to cash, procurement. These are business processes that every organization has. But now that we're at the point of scale where we can begin to focus on those specific kinds of tasks and how they're happening within oil and gas and within financial services and within CPG and retail.
So that's a little different, because then you get the expertise in area, but then you start specializing it as you're growing.
That's right.
Versus specializing in one. You wouldn't want to do that, because that might, yeah. How would you determine that? Whether you just start out by focusing on a specific industry, and then going into the next one by one?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really depends on the product. For us, because we have I guess it's almost a double-edged sword for us, because we have the good fortune of really being able to provide a solution for almost any type of business, as long as it's large and complex and has multiple fragmented technology systems that are trying to run, complex processes, right? Like that's the environment that we thrive in. But that exists across every industry. So for us, it made sense for us to really just start out by focusing on horizontal use cases, the kinds of use cases that apply to many businesses. But I think, again, it depends on the business. I think there are many solutions out there. When I was in the social media business, right, we did a lot in entertainment and communications companies and retailers, right? Like that was just sort of the orientation of companies that were looking to use modern channels, social media channels to reach and understand their audiences.
How do you keep people motivated and accountable?
Right. So motivation, hugely important, right? I think there are a couple of layers to the question. I think on one hand, right, you have to think about, I think about the acquiring, or the acquired, as a leader with the acquired company, right? You've got to provide your people with a clear vision of why this is happening and where we're going and why 1 + 1 = 3. I think as the acquiring company, the motivation comes from helping people to understand that, there's a cultural fit, that this is a good thing, that we're going to be better together. Right. And I think that having a really well orchestrated communication plan, I think, is super important. When it comes to motivation, there's sort of the conventional thinking, which is the carrot and the stick, right? Or the stick and the carrot. And that works. That can work for a little while, right? That's motivations and penalties. But that is not a long-term strategy, right? There's a guy by the name of Daniel Pink, who's an author. I don't know if you've heard of him. You can look him up on YouTube. He's got some great videos. He's fantastic. He did a lot of research on motivation, and he basically identified three key areas, three essential ingredients to motivation. And one of them was vision, like that everybody needs to have a clear and shared vision of, like, where are we going? Why am I here? Why am I coming to work every day? Is there something? Am I a part of something? Right? That's a critical piece of it, right? And I think that's where the executive communication comes from. So it's that vision piece. Also, another piece that he identified was autonomy. Very interesting, right? Is that autonomy is something that people thrive. They crave having the ability to make some of their own decisions. Like, we know the destination, we know where we're trying to get to, but you need to let me decide and figure out what's the best way to get there, right? And so I think that autonomy is an important part of it. Third piece, mastery. So the idea is that people want to do what they're good at, right? And so help people, provide ongoing training, but help people to get good at what they're doing and what they want to do. And when you combine that with purpose and autonomy, you can really provide an environment where there really is sustained motivation.
In our situation of going from a single solution to having a portfolio of offerings, how do you approach that? Like, especially to think of shifting that go-to-market.
I think there's a couple of things to consider here. One is that the best place to sell is to a happy customer, right? And so I think one of the things that you should look at, I mean, maybe I'm stating the obvious here, right? But you have existing clients or past clients. That's the perfect place to go and say, hey, I'm excited to share with you that we have expanded our portfolio. As an existing or a previous customer, we wanted to make you aware that we have some offerings that that may be of interest and value to you. So, to me, I think going to the installed base is extremely valuable. I think when you look at the new offerings, you also have to look at is the plan. I think you have to decide if the objective is to sell these as a suite. Right? Is this a suite of offerings that is being sold together, or is this a series of sort of individual solutions that can be sold individually, right? I think that's a consideration. You need to look at the competitive landscape, right? Like, who are the competitors? You may have different competitors for each of the solutions, to identify sort of what the marketing opportunity is. But also, if they could be sold together, maybe that can also represent some differentiation, right? Is that when these are sold together, this combination of offerings is truly unique. And I think that's one of the things that people need to think about is, how are you different? What's your differentiation? And what's the value? What's the value of your differentiation? And who values it, right? And so I think if you can sort of work through that, then you can figure out sort of how to productize your offerings. You may find that there are sort of interesting combinations of packages that can be offered to specific targeted individuals. And then it's a question of, sort of positioning the differentiated value. So to me, those are just some kind of off the cuff thoughts on packaging and moving from a single product to a suite.
I like the idea of figuring out the value, if it is a combination or if it's purely in a series. I guess the other thing I've been questioning is like pricing your solution. I think that's a big thing we struggle with, because we sell into a variety of different corporations, shapes and sizes. And, there's some clear cases where organizations are running $1 billion+ of M&A through, a year or two, and they're managing it and they're getting a lot of efficiency gains. I'm curious around that. Like, do you think through of building a business case based on the value you're delivering, or is it a lot of these tools based on how much data consumption or some variable there that's purely associated with usage?
Yes. Yeah, that is an interesting challenge. I will say that there are many organizations that talk about value pricing. There are very few that do it.
Okay.
It's one of those things that and I'll just tell you just a quick anecdote here. Is that we actually can offer value pricing because the metrics that we address are so clear cut. It's easy for us to clearly identify a business performance metric, a KPI that we can say, if we can successfully move this metric from here to here, then let's agree that you're gonna agree to pay us a baseline fee, but if we achieve this business performance metric, then you're gonna pay us an accelerator. And there are some customers who like that idea, and there are others who are like, you know what? We love that you guys are offering that. We love that you're offering that because it means that you believe in your product. And so, but we want to just go with the simple. We want to go with the simple pricing model, and sometimes that's the response we get. Because I think some people feel like it's more to manage, but pricing is not necessarily my area of expertise. But I will say, like, we've explored a number of different pricing alternatives. When we're implementing a solution that has to do with procurement, we can create a pricing option that's based on the number of invoices that are processed, for example. But generally, what we hear from customers is that they want something simple. They want simple, flat rate, all you can eat, pricing. And so I think, you can start out with, I don't know if you guys do pilots, but I think, paid pilots is obviously a good way to sort of validate the technology. But then beyond that, I think ultimately customers prefer to have sort of a fixed fee, flat rate. But you can certainly look at the variable components. For us, it's the number of transactions. It's also computing power, right? So we have computing power, we have transaction specific related pricing components, and then we also offer flat rates. So I think we're still trying to figure out what the optimal pricing model is. It's a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah, it's interesting because it sounds like the clearer you can connect the pricing model to value, then you can start driving towards value-based pricing. But when it gets more ambiguous, then That's where you got to focus on keeping things just simple as possible.
I think that's right.
Going to to go to market around the portfolio, when our company grows, or even another company, you get to the point when you want to increase your capabilities and you buy something. Especially when you buy, and there's a couple of situations, right? You may just buy a product and saying, hey, we're going to incorporate this into our go-to-market. But you may have a product and a sales team, and then figuring out how you're going to bring the two together.
Yeah.
Have you dealt with any of those situations?
A little bit. I mean, I've certainly seen them. I've observed them, and I've been directly involved. There are a number of considerations, right? Because when you acquire, there's the question of, okay, is the technology additive to what we're doing? Like, is it we're purchasing something that's going to be incremental to our current portfolio, which means that we need the original, the acquired salespeople to either be overlays, right? That's one option, is that they can be sort of overlays to our existing sales team, because now we've got this new specialized additional offering, or they can get assimilated into the sales organization, in which case they have to learn the acquiring company's products, and the original sales reps have to learn, the new products. So you've got that to deal with. So I think you really need to be clear on what your strategy is, what is your product strategy? Is it additive? I'll tell you just very quickly, what I saw, a little anecdote of what I saw when I was with Sprinkler was very, very interesting, and I think very impressive. Was they were acquiring companies not necessarily for the tech, but they were acquiring companies for the talent. And they were bringing the talent in, and they were essentially rebuilding that enhanced functionality in the core product. And it took time. There were times when it took them an entire year of additional development work before that functionality was in the base product. But the reason they did that was because, in technology, if you just acquire another company and sort of bolt it onto yours, you can say that you have the functionality, but it's not really integrated. It's integrated, right? But it's not natively embedded in the core product. It doesn't really work with everything else seamlessly.
Yeah.
And it becomes difficult to manage and maintain. And I still see this today, right? We have competitors. Celonis is actually creating a new market space, and we're seeing competitors going out and purchasing the pieces of technology that they don't have, so that they can say they can do what we do. But the reality is that they can't, right? They would have to go back to the drawing board and rebuild that code in the core product for it to have the same level of robustness. So I think that it was impressive to see the commitment that Sprinkler had made to the quality of the product that they were developing in the core. They were acquiring the know-how, but they were building out a very robust core product, and I think that made the product much more scalable. And at the end of the day, it delivered a better offering to the end customers. But that also took a larger investment, and the return on the investment, took longer. There were probably, sometimes 6, 8, 10, 12 months before we really saw the benefits of the acquisition. So those are hard decisions.
Did it come with the sales team? What do you do with them in that situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, in those cases, typically what we did in that case was that the sales team came over as initially as overlays, as specialists. So they were basically helping. So there were times when they continued to sell the standalone product separately.
I got it.
And then eventually those customers were ported to the new platform when it became integrated with the mothership, so to speak. So you basically had, a team that continued to sell to their legacy customers while we actually developed new product. And then once the new product was ready, those sales reps came over as either specialists or they became, full-blown reps.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like very different way of thinking it through to get the technologies where it needs to be, then move the team to where they need to be.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Any other considerations when scaling go-to-market?
I know one of the questions, just thinking about sort of those people coming over, reps that are coming over into the new organization, and it's not always just sales, but it's obviously the supporting people. Um, for me, successful transition into the company, number one is the manager connection. It's because the reason people leave, the most common reason why people leave is because of the manager, right? And so the manager, acquiring company, the leader of that team or that group, being able to connect with those individuals that are joining, I think that's critical. I think so that's number one. 1A is for people to be really clear on what it is that they're responsible for, like, their job. What are they responsible for? 1B for me is connectivity. It's like people coming into a new organization. People are so connected today. They are so reliant and dependent on their communication systems, connectivity. If you don't get it right, if you don't help those people to get connected into their new environment, that can be very, very detrimental. And then I think obviously things just helping them to get people to get connected socially, colleagues, buddy programs. There's a variety of things that we've done to help people that are coming into the organization feel like they're a part of the team and a part of the family. So anything that you can do in that regard.
Those are good tips to get people on the same page here. The customer focus. How do you stay customer focused?
Right. It's for us, it's cultural. It's a core value for us. I mean, our number one company value is we live for customer value. And so there's I guess a self-serving reason for that. It's because we know that when customers are successful with our product, that we have lots of opportunity to expand the relationship. And so there's a real vested interest for us and for the customer in their success. And so, clearly that's a cultural aspect, but there's also a real business driver there. Organizationally, you got to make sure that you have the resources to be able to provide the level of support that they need. We've recently made significant investments in really helping to enhance what we call our CVG, the customer value group. And within the customer value group, you have customer value managers who are like your success managers, and then also more technical resources that are available, that can be contracted for, either professional services or customer value architects that are there to be able to basically help drive adoption, and to help get the value out of the solution. So I think management commitment, culture, management commitment, and then I think another big part of it is communication from leadership. One of the things that I think has been inspiring for our company, for our people, has been to actually hear from customers. We see customers attend company all hands, customers attend our world tour event. They're on stage. And so as an employee, to be able to see our customers talking about how they're using our product and the success they're having and how it's helping their company is very motivating and inspiring, and obviously something that we want to help perpetuate.
Is there anything? I mean, I like that example of really bringing the stories of the customer front and center to the company. Are there anything else tactical that you would do to keep that emphasis about the customer, and making that part of the culture, putting logos around the office or
Oh, I
backgrounds
mean,
these days, or
yeah,
I
sure.
don't know.
Sure. I mean, I just think it's top of mind, just making it top of mind for everybody. But certainly, I think there are things that you can do tactically. Logos, I think, is a great idea. We've done contests for customer success stories. So we've had, customer value managers that are responsible for trying to collect kind of customer success metrics, and so we've done some sort of fun competitions, because part of it, part of it is that it takes, I think it also takes focus on our part. Like, customer success isn't something that necessarily is automatic, right? It's not something that customers volunteer and they raise their hand and they say, hey, Kison, I just want to call you and tell you how much we love your product, and I want to share with you some amazing metrics and business, improvements that we achieved as a result of doing business with you, right? That doesn't happen very often. And so it takes a concerted effort where, we need to go in and ask people. People forget. I've found customers forget what it was like before they had your product. It doesn't take them long to forget, right? Because now they're living in this new world, and they're doing this new thing, and they've got this new process, and sometimes they lose sight of all of the benefits that they're achieving, and so I think it really helps to have somebody that's there to help. We call it mining for metrics, right? So it's like, let's get in there and ask, because once you do that, once you develop sort of these success stories for the customer, now you're giving them content that they can use internally, and so. That's, I guess I'm a little bit off topic here from your question.
No,
I think it's,
I think it's pretty relevant. It's like encouraging them to get those customer stories and then being able
that's right.
to circulate them around the company.
That's right. That's right. They're good for the customer, right? Because now they can justify the investment that they've made, and the people that are running the project can stand up and say, hey, we're doing good work here. And the executives that sponsored it can say, hey, we made a good investment here. This is a good thing. Right. And then, you as the provider, have something that you can add to your customer success library.
Where do you use that? Like those testimonies, things like that?
Well, we have written into our agreement, we have written into our contracts, and, customers have the ability to sort of strike it, but, we ask them for their approval, allow us to use their logo. And if we generate a case study, typically we'll ask the customer to agree to participate in a case study, or allow us to document a customer success metric. And so we will use those in our sales campaigns.
What are examples? I feel like that's a challenge for us, is thinking of customer success metrics, especially on the software side, because how do you conclude that this is going to make you whatever X percentage efficient, faster?
Yeah,
it's hard. It's really ambiguous. We're unfortunately not like in your spot where it's so crystal clear on the value.
sure.
Yeah.
And this is where I think, this. So I'll go back to my, mining for metrics. Is because, mining is like, it takes a little bit of work, right? You got to swing the pickaxe and dig it out. And I think that if you can encourage your people to do that, it's sometimes it can be anecdotal. It can be, a story, and it should be a story. But I think that if you're working with a cooperative customer, and you're working with somebody that is motivated to work with you, and we mentioned the concept of champions. I think it's extremely important for you to not only have champions to win the business, but you need champions to keep the business. And one of the ways that you keep the business is by being able to dig out those success stories.
I think you got a good point there. It's just not going to be gleaming at you on the surface. You're going to have to dig in and ask those questions.
That's right. And look, everybody makes, this is a very common mistake to make, is that you think that just because, the person that helped you to win the business is going to be the same person that's going to help you to expand the business. And that's not necessarily the case. Today people are changing jobs. There's mobility. They're So we see it time and time again where the person or people that really helped us to win the business, we're now dealing with new people, and we basically have to develop them, start over in terms of the process of developing them into champions, into people who want this to succeed. And so, don't ever, I believe, especially in SaaS, software as a service, that the process of identifying, developing, testing, and leveraging champions never ends. It never ends.
There's a really great view on that. That's something true. Dick, I got to ask, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
The craziest thing I've seen in M&A, I have to tell you that I don't know that I've ever seen anything crazy, but I did allude to this earlier. I just thought I was really amazed at this particular company that actually went through and did about 5 or 6 acquisitions over the course of about 2 years. And every single one of those acquisitions was about enhancing the functionality of the core product. And so to see that happen, and then to see that product, emerge into becoming the world's leading, in this case, social media management platform, was awesome to see. And the people that came in from these very, very innovative companies were just amazing people. They were people who were visionary in their space, and now they were part of a bigger vision. And so I continue to be very, very bullish on the company. Full disclosure, I have all my shares. I'm still hanging on to all of my shares from Sprinkler, but nevertheless, that was very exciting to see. And I wish them continued success, and hats off to them for really their commitment that they had to really putting all of the effort into making the product great.
Sounds like I'm gonna have to have a chat with their corp dev team over there. Get some lessons learned. That's the dream, and it doesn't always get executed, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So we're switching things up on this interview, and I reached out to Dick Dunkel, who's an expert at sales, and wanted to get some advice about building our own go-to-market here at M&A Science. But I also wanted to convey that advice to our future, where we can look for opportunities and potentially make our own acquisitions. So it's a little bit of a blended interview. It's a little more focused on the early stage companies and thinking through building out the go-to-market for us, particularly moving from a single product to a portfolio of solutions. But let's jump to the interview, and I hope you enjoy. Dick, what's the best way to build a sales structure?
So at the top level, you have to think about sales org structure. So answering the following questions can help you to define this. What's market awareness? Who are your target organizations and buyer personas? We talked a little bit about that. How disruptive is your offering? Is it a budgeted tool or a commodity, or would it be considered an unbudgeted investment? How innovative is the offering? How are you different? How will you compete? What selling motion best aligns with your offering and your buyer? What selling motions does your competition follow? What buyer-seller motions are your target personas most familiar with? These insights can then lead to help you resolve the structural question of how will we generate demand? Who will be responsible? Will we employ a BDR function, business development function? Do we need outside or an in-field sales organization? So that to me, that's the organizational structure piece. The next level is sales culture, and we talked about that. So recognizing that sales culture and company culture can be somewhat different. They're a reflection of each other. And finally, we have sales execution. So this is where I spend most of my time and focus. And this is, business, the things that you have to figure out: business model, contracts, pricing, common language, methods, and frameworks. That's when you're starting to build a sales execution model. Like that's like, right after you've defined your business model and you've got figured out what your contracts look like and what your pricing is, the next thing you've got to figure out is what's your common language, what are your methods and frameworks? And this is where MEDDIC comes in. Sales stages, right? That's a framework. Discovery methodology. What's the process that you're going to use to engage in discovery? What's the framework that you're going to use? A repeatable framework that helps your people in the field to effectively navigate through a successful discovery process, right? That reveals the needs and the opportunities and how you can provide the most valuable solution. Methods of business or financial justification. So you've got to have a financial justification, a method of technical validation, proposals, services, security terms. So these are all sort of essential ingredients. And then once you've figured out your common language, methods, and frameworks, the next thing to figure out is your infrastructure. What's your tech stack? Are you using spreadsheets? Do you have a CRM system? What are the productivity enhancing tools that you're using for prospecting? Like, what tools are you investing in for research? To me, that's all under infrastructure. So to me, those are when I think about building sales structure, to me, it comes down to those three things: the organizational structure, the culture, and the kind of the methods and frameworks.
Hey, Dick, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us a nice blended interview of advice for growing our current business, but also thinking forward and how we could integrate some future acquisitions.
My pleasure, and I hope that maybe this slightly fresh perspective on things is offered you maybe some a little bit of a unique perspective.
Hey, thanks, Dick, and here's to the deal.
Yeah, thanks, you too.